Okay, welcome to an episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. I have a really great review for you guys from the brand NOMOS. A little about them. They are a German brand founded back in 1990 by Roland Schwertner, and this brand is pretty much grown to become the largest manufacturer of mechanical timepieces in all of Germany. Yes, which is pretty impressive considering how relatively young this brand is. Now, in terms of the type of watch, I consider this an everyday watch. Some key characteristics in design, which you're looking for something that you can wear every day. Of course, you're going to want something that's clean, classic, with a more minimalist design, and something that is also sensibly sized. This is their Club Sport Neomatik 39 with the smoke dial reference 763. And this sporty NOMOS automatic watch represents style and connoisseurship while adding luster without being overbearing for daily wear, with a slim yet 20 atmosphere water resistant robust case profile. You can get this for $3,310 direct from the brand. And man, this is a release that I've been waiting for, I feel like, for some time, and I think a lot of folks have been waiting for. So I was really excited to be able to get my hands on this piece. Very special thank you to NOMOS for lending this in and letting me spend some time with it. I wore it, and really got a great feel for it. And I have to say that I was very impressed, just as I thought I would be. And of course, it's still a NOMOS, so it still has long lugs, and there's still going to be certain aspects of it that maybe stop it from being perfect. But I think for what it is, I think it's an absolute gem, within the industry. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, let's check out this beauty. So one of the things I really love, of course, is going to be that minimalist design layout. It's just very clean, very classic, very well balanced, very symmetrical. And I know some of you are probably looking at this and thinking, man, this has definitely some Rolex Oyster Perpetual vibes. It does. But I'd say it captures a lot of that, mostly with just the level of versatility and, of course, the high level of finish here. It's definitely a completely different type of watch. Look at how thin this thing is. I mean, come on. Also, look at how long that lug to lug is. Let's get into some of those dimensions. So this actually, measuring it with my calipers, I get it at 39.4 millimeters in diameter, 8.5 millimeters thick, and 49.7 millimeters lug to lug. So it still is going to be on the larger side, but I think that's actually, again, it's less of an oversight and it's more of their actual, design choices in terms of the aesthetic of these watches and what make them signature to NOMOS, and which also helps them not be so confused against maybe other watches and other benchmarks within the space. Of course, there's always going to be a bit of that marketing side in terms of search engine optimization and marketing things as a 39 millimeter when, hey, it's really a 39.4, etc. But the nice thing is, if you go to NOMOS's website, they're actually very transparent in terms of their actual dimensions versus just, kind of what's in the title and the drop down of each watch. So I can appreciate that. And there's always going to be a little bit of variance when you, take your own calipers to each watch. But I like to post off of the caliper readings that I get personally, just so that I know kind of where things kind of add up. Now, getting into the crystal, guys, it is a low domed sapphire, and you can see also a low amount of distortion, even at a very harsh angle. Very legible, very readable, and very well executed. Now, it also does have an inner AR coating, which is going to help. And yeah, I think it does that well. You guys can see a really clean, crisp viewing angle of this beautiful dial straight on. Wow. It does have a push-pull crown, which is signed. Yes, push-pull crown with 200 meters of water resistance and a display case back, of all things. They're not the first brand to do this. There are other brands that also can do that, and it's one of those things that's not impossible. You do have to have, of course, very, very high tolerances in terms of the seals and the gaskets and everything like that, and you also need to ensure that your crown is pushed in, but as long as it is, then you'll be really good to go. It's more so a testament to how well built this piece is versus realistically really how much you're going to want to use this. Like, you're not going to want to take this diving, although yes, it does hold up. It's just not that type of watch, right? There's other choices that are out there that would be better for that functionality, but it's more so about building to a high enough tolerance to where, hey, you can pressure test this and it will still pass. So very impressive from their part, and that's what I would take away from the additional water resistance. It's more about robustness and tolerance. Now, in terms of the movement, guys, check that out. You can see you have NOMOS, their automatic caliber DUW 3001, and it has a 43-hour power reserve and beats at 21,600 vibrations per hour, or 3 hertz in terms of that beat rate. So not going to be quite as smooth as a 4 hertz, but guess what? It has a small seconds. So to that, and it's going to be quite smooth, right? It really starts only looking choppy if you have a really long seconds hand, let's say a central seconds, and at the very ends and the tips are where you're going to see some breakage in terms of that smooth sweep. Here, with it that small, it's really not going to be an issue, and if anything, it's probably smarter in terms of, one, having a better power reserve, and two, also having less wear and tear on the movement long term, especially when you're thinking about something that is in-house, where you typically want to have it serviced by somebody who works with NOMOS movements. Now, in terms of the dial, guys, beautiful gray sunburst dial, no date, of course, so it's very well balanced. You're getting that small second sub dial above the 6 o'clock. You're getting really cool printed index there, as you guys can see. But one thing that's unique is that it actually has recessed dial for that hour index, so you can get that thicker lume fill. And if you guys can maybe just take a look there, you might be able to tell there's a little bit of dimensionality there to the hour index, because it is, filled versus just being printed on there. So it's going to be a little bit more potent, and some might even think a lot more potent, which we'll get to once we get to shutting the lights off here. But yeah, this thing is very clean. You've seen this layout before. I do prefer this to the California dial style layout, which I understand California dials are historically very cool and hip. But for me, this layout, with all the same numerals, I think that looks fantastic. Getting into the bracelet here, really nice 20 millimeter lug width, solid 3-link bracelet with brushed and polished setup there, really fine brushing, very nice high polish as well. And you're gonna also have a 3-position milled semi-manual toolless micro adjust. You can see that there, looks very familiar, but what they have is basically the same setup for quick release spring bars, to where you can pinch essentially and then you can move that, right? Which isn't going to be super easy or super intuitive, but if you are in a pinch and you don't have a punch tool, guess what? You can now do this without tools. So it's not really, I wouldn't say it's on the fly, but it is technically toolless. So I can appreciate that. All milled here, which is great. Has a nice curvature in terms of the way that it wears. And of course, I think most people would prefer that this were brushed versus high polished. The nice thing about when things like this are high polished is you can typically just polish them right back up. Let me just give it a quick wipe here, and you get, back to a high polish finish, versus if you were to have it brushed and you scratched it, if you rebrush it, it might not match the brushing. So, I'm looking for some silver linings there. But with that said, let's actually get it on the wrist and see how it wears. All right, guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this is really, really nice. And although I do have a larger wrist, it is quite round, you can see, so it's tall. It's not like it's really flat and thin and really accommodating to long lug to lug. It is definitely something that I still have to be, pretty thoughtful about. But of course, if I do get my wrist a bit too close to the lens, you're going to get some perspective distortion, which is going to make the watch appear much larger than it actually is. So one thing I like to do is actually just keep my wrist nice and low, and then just tighten up the frame here so you guys can get still a detailed look, but just maybe a bit of a truer aspect ratio as to how this may lay on your own wrist. So you guys can see very nice and very thin. That thin profile is something that I think goes quite underappreciated when you're thinking about an in-house automatic movement. How many of these in-house automatic movements are so thick, so much thicker than ETA movements, to where honestly you're kind of wondering why they even strayed away from them at times. I should say not just ETAs, but variations as well, and clones of the ETA, whether it be Salida or even getting into some of the other brands that are out there. But let's appreciate this for what it is. It is, an in-house movement, and that means that this is a full watch company and a watch brand that really know what they're doing. They're not just into watch design, although man, are they known for these very, very handsome designs. And I think this looks really great on my wrist, and I've tried a few different Nomos. I have to say, when this one came out, I thought to myself, man, that's probably going to be my perfect one. And I have to say, I don't know, I feel like it could be. But I feel like it could also be slightly smaller, like a 38. And I know that seems silly when it's at 39.4. So what would the difference between a 38 be? But I don't know. There's something about it. I do like it. I like how dynamic it is, but also with how open the dial is, it does give you that visual punch, and how thin it is, it also does stretch the case and make it feel a little bit wider, which is interesting to me, because if this was thicker, let's say this was, right now it's 8.5, if it was closer to 10 millimeters, I would probably say proportionally it would feel less large, which is weird because I think it would just feel a little bit more well-rounded, right? So it's one of those things, nothing's perfect. And of course, the more you look at something, the more you're going to find. But here, there's still a lot of detail to find when you spend some time with it. And I think there's a lot of details to really enjoy. This is just an absolute joy to wear. It's so thin, and again, that size is also accentuated by by the dimensions here, right? By how long the lugs are, by how wide things and open things are. You really get a feel for how flat this is and how thin it wears. And then to think this is actually a robust watch with 200 meters of water resistance. It just lets you know, again, it just gives you that feeling of quality, right? So, would I love it more if they had some brushing? Yeah. I think if they brushed the center links, if they brushed the actual, parts of the case, maybe even just the tops of the lugs there, I think that would be amazing. Or even, brushing out the bezel would be really cool. You could keep the sides high polished, and that would also still tie in beautifully to this bracelet, which I think it's smart to brush, or to say polish the sides, because then they essentially can just reflect off the skin and give you an even thinner wearing experience, which this does. But yeah, again, it's definitely more nitpicky. And when you have something that is overall so nice and so quote unquote perfect, that's kind of the only feedback you can get into, is really nitpicky. So with that said, let's actually get this piece off the wrist, set up for some bloom shots, a light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Yes, as you can see, that loom is immaculate, right? So with that, extra depth, you're also getting depth within the dial. You're getting depth rating as well as depth in the dial to be able to apply that extra layer of loom, and I think it definitely pays off. But one thing I always like to work in, of course, is going to be a bit of a light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. Man, ooh, what a looker. Oh my, yes. This is, what's funny is, as simple as this design is, they really understand texturing and light play, because this is extremely dynamic when it comes to the way it's just going to come to life under different lighting positions. Wow. To even include maybe a bit of harsh lighting, which we could expose any types of production defects. But all you're going to see here is, yes, this is a pressed loaner. It's been worn. It is not in brand new condition. You're going to see a couple of little micro scratches and everything like that. And some of it is just due to, shooting this in 4K. So it's getting a really detailed look there, probably more so than your normal eye would. But man, look at the way the dial Just the slow, beautiful texture there. Not super dynamic in terms of the color. But you guys can see that gray, it also has a couple of warm hues here and there that it can pick up. And, you're going to have those little bright slivers. It's going to relatively look gray through most of it and then have more high silver points. So this is going to be like a dial that seems black in most lighting and then has a couple of gray streaks in it. This is going to be more so on the lighter side. So you're going to get more of a true deep gray most of the time. And then you're going to also have a couple of little shots and slivers of silver depending on the lighting condition. But man, this is just such a gorgeous piece. I could probably do this all day, and I might just, but I'll save you guys from it and get the lights back on here. So we can get into closing thoughts, guys. On the wrist, this wears surprisingly well, despite that kind of long-ish lug to lug, thanks to a really dialed in set of proportions, and that's where I think they did really well. So even if the scale isn't for you, I think the proportions play well enough to where it makes it extremely wearable, right? And even though the lug to lug is quite long and the watch is quite thin, which and of course the dial is quite spacious. It just, there's a lot that's working together and against itself. It's already a smaller size at 39.4 millimeters, and it's quite thin, but because of the way they play with those proportions, the way things balance out on the wrist, I think it does come together in a really, really beautiful, harmonious way. Now, in terms of model variants, this is also available in an Ember and a Tabac dial. The Ember is more of a taupe color, which is fantastic and also very, very versatile, a little bit warmer. And then the Tabac is more of a true brown dial. And those look amazing. This would be my pick, although it is probably a little bit more boring by comparison to those two. It's going to also be a lot more versatile, which ultimately when you're spending, at least for me, within the way that I purchase watches, within this price bracket of, $3,300, I'm going to want something that I potentially could be wearing through most of the week. And I think that's really what you have here, is something that could really be a beautiful daily, pseudo luxury type of timepiece. So in terms of comparable models, considering the fully in-house nature and the 200 meters of water resistance, honestly, it's pretty tough to think about a truly direct competitor, especially at the price point, right? With as luxurious a build quality as you're going to find here. So yeah, it's tough, but let me know down in the comments, like, what would you cross shop something like this against? So for me, guys, bottom line, NOMOS really strike a unique sweet spot of high design, value for money, and brand recognition with, really legitimate specs. So they're kind of like that, the Tudor of dress watches, as I've said it in the last couple of these. And I think that's a great niche to lead in, right? Where it's just like, hey, value proposition, very respectable, and people can appreciate a lot of the fine details you're putting into it. There's a lot of market segments that don't appreciate a lot of the details that you're going to find here. And, there might be some viewers here that don't really understand why a simple, no date, no complication watch is really costing so much, right? But I think for what they are with the, where they resonate within the market, it's really a grand slam. Like, they're really in touch with what enthusiasts want. Again, this is not a real casual watch. This is something that is bold enough and versatile enough at the same time to really capture the attention of a very broad enthusiast market, which I can appreciate. So, within kind of that great niche of value proposition within the dressy watch range, the club range really, again, they hit a sweet spot within a sweet spot with models like this, where it's not only dressy, it's also quite sporty, it's also quite signature. It doesn't feel like an homage. It doesn't feel like it's necessarily directly targeting any particular space that already exists, but very naturally it could, because of each one of those attributes that come together to kind of perform and conform into such a wonderful timepiece. So with that said, let me know what you guys all think down in the comments below. If you liked the video, please do a like, and if you're already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.